Welcome, Greek U Nations, episode number 549 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our sixth book just came out. It's called I'm So Beautiful, It's Ridiculous, Unleashing and Promoting Strength, Self-Worth, and Real Sisterhood. So go and pick up that book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, I do talk about alcohol and drug abuse prevention on college campuses very often, and marijuana usage is always this difficult conversation because college students want to know why the states would legalize marijuana if it is so bad for you. And the answer to some of that is certainly about revenue. That's certainly a piece of it. If it's legalized, then the states can tax the sales of marijuana. But the bigger issue here is the damage that regular marijuana use can do when your brain is not fully developed as a young adult in college. I almost wish we could delay the use of marijuana in young adults until like after 26 years of age or so, when the brain is fully developed. Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about this on today's show. Stephen Melman is an author, speaker, seasoned mental health professional working as a psychotherapist and a work-life coach who understands the struggles we encounter. No matter what the arena is, his mission is to provide practical, common sense tips, tools, and solutions to help those he encounters live a more fulfilling and resilient life. Stephen brings his personal life experiences and his background as a mental health professional to help others with his wealth of understanding and insight. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Hi, thank you, Michael. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, the pleasure is mine. It's always good to have a mental health expert on our show. So, listen, there's plenty to talk about with college students and mental health. So, let's talk a little bit about your undergraduate experience because that's where it all starts for so many of us. You decided on Memphis State for your undergraduate experience. So, I'm wondering, why did you decide that Memphis State was the right place for you?
I'm not so sure as I decided so much as they were taking a chance on me. So it went like this. And I want to be honest with your audience. So I got into Memphis State on a probationary basis because my grades were okay in high school, but I didn't do so well in the entrance test. So I always say that if you give me a chance, I can succeed. And so they were nice enough to give me a chance, and I had a 3.0 average, and I knew that the graduate school was what I wanted to do. So I maintained a 3.0 average, and then went on to get my master's degree. So that's how I wound up at Memphis State.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. They gave you a chance, right? I mean, that's all any of us can ask for is just take a chance on me and I'll prove you right. And you know what? Listen, if I'm being honest with our audience too, my undergraduate grades were not very good as an undergraduate. I was majoring in fraternity. And so, a lot of my grades were just not there. I had different priorities as an undergraduate. And I remember going into my master's program, and there was a big, boardroom table, and all the professors, all the doctors are around this table. And then I'm sitting in the front, and they have a copy of my transcript, every one of them. And they're sitting there reading my transcript as an undergrad, and they looked at the terrible grades that I had, and they looked at it and they said, "Why in the world should we accept you into this master's program? Your grades are god awful." And I said, it was because of my priorities. I said, I majored in fraternity. You have to understand that that was my priority. But they said, if you give me a chance, just give me a chance. I am telling you that I'm going to be the best student you guys have ever had. And they took a chance on me, and sure enough, they were right. Sure enough, ended up getting a 4.0 in the master's program, and then went on to get a 4.0 in the doctoral program. So it just goes to show you that you can do it if you apply yourself, and somebody's got to give you a chance.
Yes. And so once they give you a chance, and you got to do your part.
You got to do your part. That's right. I had to hold up to my end of the bargain. Otherwise, they would have thrown me out on the street pretty fast, So, it's a two-way street for sure. Now, you're a psychotherapist after all of that. You're a mental health professional. You wrote that book I see there in the background. It's called Guidance for New Clinicians in a Chaotic World. So you're somebody who has very traditional values. How do you preserve those traditional values while you're working with cases of depression, bipolar anxiety, substance abuse, schizophrenia, and much more?
Okay, good question. So I'm authentic, want to be authentic, want to be a straight shooter with people, and uh, but how it really applies, and maybe it's pertinent to your audience, but I'm talking about traditional values as it pertains to marital couples or significant others, that being monogamous. Um, and when it comes to parenting, of having guardrails on kids and parenting issues, and your goal of parenting is not to be your kid's friend; it's to be their parent.
Mm.
And there's goals that you need to make sure that your kids attain. And just really quickly, so I'm a step parent, and my wife has a third. At the time, the stepdaughter was 13 years old, and and they had a really special relationship. But my wife was very, very strict, and when they became adults together, my wife and daughter are really, really, really close. I always say that the umbilical cord was stretched but never severed. And so they have a very special relationship. And you say now they're friends, but when she was parenting her, it was not a friendship.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's where the traditional values comes from.
Hmm. I like that. I think it's really good. A lot of students today in college, they do have this like best friend relationship with their parents. And I find that to be very interesting because, as somebody who, is Gen X, my dad made it very clear, just like you mentioned. He said, I'm not your friend. He said, I'm your father. He said, don't confuse the two. Right. And he was very clear about that. And you know what? I've certainly appreciated that. But it is a different dynamic, it feels like, with today's college students. Are you seeing a little bit of a difference there, a little bit of a shift?
Yes,
Mhm.
definitely. There's
Mhm.
definitely a shift, but and sometimes and talk about being authentic. It's having a client educate me as to how they see the world.
Yeah.
That it's different, and I have to make that shift, that pivot, to hear about what their values are and how to help them to accomplish their goals. But it's each generation is a little bit different, and you as a clinician need to make that shift, or you lose your client.
Yeah, no question about that. Well, let's talk a little bit about goals. There's a lot of students listening right now that are members of fraternities and sororities, and sometimes communication across an entire student organization can be a problem. So, what is the best way for our listeners to improve communication with one another in order to accomplish those team goals?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a best way, but I can offer some observations. One is I always remember this: I never learned anything if I was the one doing the talking.
Mm.
So the very first thing is to ask questions and let people elaborate, give and for me to listen intently. And just as you're doing, Michael, you're nodding your head. Nodding your head does not always mean that we agree with each other. It oftentimes will mean that we're following each other's train of thought.
Mhm.
So it
Yeah.
could be giving each other eye contact. It could be when a person finishes talking, not to immediately say, "Well, now let me tell you how I think about that." Instead, it might be to summarize what you heard the other person say.
Hmm.
And then we could have a conversation. Well, here's how I see it, and maybe in a different way. And then now that we've established where we come from, now let's talk about goals. And sometimes it's about compromising and not to dig your heels in and say it's got to be my way or the highway.
Hmm. Yeah, you're right about that. We have to be better listeners. I think that's really the key to being a good leader is to listening to what the team wants and sometimes letting the team come up with the goals. I think that's really important. They're usually going to help support what they, believe is important to them. So you might want to start listening to what your team is asking for and letting them set some of those goals because that's a very empowering thing for the people that are following you. So that is really good stuff. Now, a lot of college students, and my own kids included, they seem to procrastinate quite a bit. So, how can college students today avoid that procrastination, leaving all of those assignments until the very last minute?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to kind of tie procrastination, stress management, and time management to kind of together. So first of all, when we procrastinate, we're waiting to the last moment. Look how much stress we're putting on ourselves.
Mhm.
And then wondering why we're stressed out and we waited until the last moment. Well, yeah, no kidding. Okay, even to this day, I still do this, which is I have a task list. And when I was in both the undergraduate and graduate school, I had an erasable board, and I wanted to keep every day balanced so that no one day was overloaded with more tasks than another day. So I tried to keep it as balanced as I could. If it was, for instance, a book report, I would decide, what book am I going to read? How many pages does it have? If I have a month to read the book and do a summary of the book or a written form, I would literally take 3 weeks to read the book and a week to write the paper. So I would look to see how many pages there are in the book and divide it up. So every day had a number of pages I need to read every day. Again, you're keeping it balanced. And then that gives you, if you keep on target, you're not going to stress yourself out. And then you have your week to write it, including your rough draft and the finished product and something you can be proud of.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's all about managing your time and good stress management tips. Keeping everything balanced, making sure you're taking care of yourself. Things like making sure you're getting 7-8 hours of sleep a night,
Mm-hmm.
making sure that your meals are balanced. You're not skipping meals. Exercise, getting out, fresh air. All those things are engaging with friends, interests, hobbies. That's the nice thing about college life is it's you want to have the college experience of having all of the above, from athletics and friendships, but don't forget why you're actually in college, which is the academics, to
Yeah.
do the best you can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, the exercise was really, really critical for reducing stress. I made sure that I had a partner, somebody, my big brother in the fraternity, somebody who was willing to go with me and hold me accountable because there were days, I got to be honest with you, I would wake up in college and I'd be like, I don't feel like going to the gym. And there was nothing that was going to get me there because I just was like this, immovable object. But I had a partner who was counting on me to go to the gym every day. So he held me accountable. And on the days where I didn't feel like going, he would come over and be like, you are getting up and out of bed right now. And same thing, the vice versa. There were days when he just couldn't get up. And I found a way to prod him out of bed and get to the gym. So I think that accountability is really important. And that was a great way for me to reduce stress because it is very stressful being a college student. There's a lot of financial, demands on these students. There's a high workload. A lot of them have part-time jobs. They have the fraternity or sorority. There's so many things that you're balancing here, and it becomes difficult to balance. And so you need these coping mechanisms that Steve is talking about to help you to manage all of that stress. And so for me, exercise was it, but you got to find what works for you. Everybody's slightly different, but I will tell you, exercise was great for me for reducing stress. Really good.
Me too. And I'm a tennis player, so
Yeah.
I've used tennis ever since I was like 13 years old,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm
That's
still
really good.
using it today.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That is really good. And now pickleball is like the latest thing. So you could
Yes,
always, maneuver to pickleball at some point too, because everybody seems to be playing this now.
yes, they are. I'm wondering why everybody's getting injured playing pickleball. It's not supposed to be that way.
Right. That is really good. So let's talk about marijuana. I think this is a really important topic here, okay? We know that many states are now legalizing marijuana. So I get it, right? The state has said that it is now legal, and you see it very widespread on college campuses, as well. But the problem that I'm having is that students are turning to marijuana in order to deal with stress. So instead of those good coping mechanisms that we just talked about, like exercise, they're using marijuana to deal with the stress that they're under. Do you think that that is a good idea?
Well, let's make a distinction between the THC levels that are in marijuana and, for instance, CBD oil
Hmm.
or gummies or whatever that doesn't have THC. And sometimes those CBDs can help people with stress, but without getting the effects of getting a high, getting intoxicated on CBDs. Okay, but I need to make a distinction with. I grew up in the 1970s, and the TC level back in the 70s was like 3%. Today, it's at least 17%.
Oh my God.
And so there's a phenomenon that emergency room doctors refer to as cannabis-induced psychosis. So when emergency room doctors observe these people that are coming into the emergency room with paranoia and suspiciousness and hallucinations, and there's no other reason that the person did other than they abused cannabis, either for a long period of time or that they overdid it, that brought them into the emergency room then. But that's what emergency room physicians refer to it as.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
And so then there's you talked about there's psychological effects of marijuana, but there's also the medical. I just ran into this when I was writing the book, which is it's arterial peripheral arterial disorder, and it's a hardening of the arteries in the extremities, arms and legs, and it can lead to heart attacks, strokes. And so that's another reason why it's not in people's best interest to use cannabis.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then you had mentioned about all these states that are legalizing marijuana, and for what purpose is it? Yes, sometimes it's tax dollars, sometimes it's giving into the whim of the public. And so I could say to you about so what's a libertarian? A libertarian is somebody who can abide by things as long as people do it in their own home. Well, that would be great if people did that. But instead, they go, I got the munchies, and I want to have it home. Well, I don't have that at home. I need to go out and buy it. And why these states that have legalized marijuana, there's an increase in DUIs and traffic fatalities.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we need to research that a little bit more to figure out, what is the correlation between states that have legalized it and, like you said, DUI and other traffic fatalities. Is there some connection there? So I would be fascinated to read that research. I think that that would be really, really interesting stuff for us to look at. But that does impact the public. So that goes well beyond just the user. And now potentially that impact is being felt by the public if you were to get into an accident while under the influence. Yeah, definitely things for us to consider and to think about. Also, I want to talk about academic expectations. I think that prior to COVID-19, I think we started in this country to lower some of the academic expectation for children in public schools. So I'm wondering, how has this situation evolved since COVID-19?
We may have lost a whole generation of kids during COVID when everything was locked down.
Hmm.
And imagine, if you recall, everybody had to wear masks in schools. And so particularly young children, they took a look at them and they weren't able to observe people's facial expressions. They couldn't tell behind the mask whether the person was happy or sad or depressed. And parents were ill-equipped when school shut down for them as parents to do school in-home schooling. So I was just looking at stats just today, and reading comprehension proficiency reading is 39.4% the people who are able to read at their grade level. And math, it's even worse. It's 27.9%.
Wow.
That's today. So even after COVID, we haven't increased the bar. It's bad or worse.
Mm. Yeah, this is really problematic. That's what I was afraid of. I kind of instinctively I knew when we were going through COVID-19 and a lot of students in the public schools were getting their education over Zoom, et cetera. I knew instinctively, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is going to be a disaster. And I just think it's going to be fascinating to look at the research to figure out what was the impact of COVID-19 and us compartmentalizing ourselves, not getting together with teachers or friends, and all of the things that happen. What is the impact of that to humans? And I think we do have that lost generation that really was impacted quite a bit. I even think about the graduations. There were people who literally didn't have graduation because of COVID-19. And so what is the impact of that when you're
Yeah.
robbed of a graduation from high school or a graduation from college? What's the impact of that,
Or prom.
Or prom, right? I mean, these are like basic things that people go through that is, this rite of passage. And I think there is some value to rites of passage. And when you don't have it, I just wonder what the impact is. And I'm not sure that we know yet fully. I think it's going to take another 20 years for us to figure out what
Yeah.
really has happened here.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
And no time in American history did we ever shut things down, shut everything down.
Yeah.
Schools and the economy, and people lost businesses and all kinds of things. Restaurants closed down.
Hmm.
And I remember that about you had to go pick up your food, and oh, yeah, it was a nightmare.
Yeah, that was such an interesting time to live through. But I mean, thank goodness for things like Zoom and we
Yeah.
figured out ways to keep those connections going. So Zoom was certainly one way to do it. And I do think that there were certain companies like a Zoom that had a big boom of business because of COVID-19. So I think there were new companies that emerged as a result of the pandemic that never would have come to fruition if not for the pandemic. So I think both sides, we did lose a lot of restaurants. I know there were a lot of restaurants by us that ended up closing down, but I'm sure there are new businesses that started that never would have without the pandemic. So I think we gained some, we lost some, but I do worry about that impact academically for those students that were impacted that had to learn
Me too.
online. So that certainly is an issue, I think, for those students. Well, I tell you what, Steve, this has been just a really, really interesting conversation. I appreciate all of it. One of the things that we love here at the Fraternity Foodie Podcast is great food. So the next time that I happen to be in Dallas, Texas, I need to know where should I go for a great bite to eat.
Okay, and I did my research, but I need to ask you. So there's so many food choices. So if you told me what you had in mind, like pizza, there's a Cane Russo. Hamburgers is a place called Goat Burger.
Mm,
Tex-Mex, Pappasitos.
nice.
Chinese, I love buffets. Chinese buffet, The Great Wall.
Ah,
For Thai food, there's a place called KA Thai, Thai,
mhm.
and there's a Greek Mediterranean buffet called Afras, Afrahs.
Perfect. Those are some great recommendations there. Just about every kind of food you would imagine. It sounds like you've got an answer there in
Yeah,
Dallas, Texas. So
Dallas is a big foodie city.
that sounds good. Well, listen, maybe I'll meet you for that Chinese buffet and
Yes,
we'll be able to eat our hearts out.
I would love that.
Fantastic. I'll let you know the next time I'm in Dallas and we'll
Okay,
have to
please.
check out the Great Wall for the buffet.
Okay, we'll do it.
All right, sounds good. So if our college student listeners, if they want to connect with you, it could be for psychotherapist services, for speaking services, or maybe to pick up your book. It's called Guidance for New Clinicians in a Chaotic World. Where should they go to connect with you and get all of the stuff?
Well, I actually happen to have a website, and it's Stephen, STEVENMELMAN, psychotherapist.com.
Perfect.
And there's a whole array of all the services I provide, including if you wanted to order my book, you can do that.
Very good. Very good. And you can do all of those things. Anything else, Steve?
And I can't think of anything unless you have something for me, Michael, but it's been a pleasure. talking with you and your audience.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate all of the time. This has been great. So thank you so much for being on the show and helping out our college students here today. We really appreciate it, Steve.
My pleasure, Michael. You take care.
All right. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation with Steve, I want you to like it and I want you to share it with other college students on campus that need to hear his words. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Bye for now.